Hey friends, welcome to the Quaker Take. My friend JP is joining me tonight, and we are going to be chatting about Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. How you doing, JP?
Doing great. Thanks for having me and great to see you again.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. So we have actually chatted about this book before. We had quite an extensive discussion about this book, and then I thought it would be a good idea to maybe record it, have another conversation, and go over a bit more about it, and record a bit about it. So appreciate you agreeing to do that.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I didn't write down all the specifics. I think it was published. When was this published? Like 1952. So talking about 1952 around that. Um, and you've read a bunch more of C.S. Lewis than me. I think I've only read The Abolition of Man and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and you've read a bunch of his other stuff, right?
Yeah, it's a recent development, let's say. I got an anthology of a lot of his non-fictional stuff, and I read that recently. So it's relatively fresh in my mind. Didn't read uh, the Narnia stuff, which is odd, but I did read a lot of his non-fictional stuff, yeah.
Okay. So, Mere Christianity, we decided to read this sort of independently, but then when we found out we were both reading it, we thought it was fun to talk about. So, um, yeah, so I thought how we might approach this is just go over some things that we liked about it and then talk about some things that we didn't particularly like about it. So, do you want to start? Something that you liked about it?
Something that I liked about it. Um, I like this stuff. His discussion of pride. I thought that was very illuminating to me. That was the main gem, as it were, that I got out of this book. He has this notion that in within Christianity, you have this notion that pride is the worst of vices. Let's say, if I'm not mistaken, you correct me, Bill.
Mhm.
You're the Christian between the two of us. Although C.S. Lewis would seem to disagree, but that's for another day.
True.
uh, uh, so I've always thought of pride as sure a vice, but I've always had a hard time understanding why pride was such a deep form of evil within the Christian framework, as opposed to others that, on their face, appear to be more evil.
Mhm.
Um, Psychopathy, I don't know, of any kind, or being murderers, or something like that. And Lewis said something that, for the first time, made me realize something about pride, which I think is correct. He said that, if I'm not mistaken, that pride is the only vice that necessarily uh, puts you in a kind of zero sum game frame with respect to other people. That it is essentially competitive. Other vices are competitive in the sense that, if I affirm myself, I have to deny you in some, and I have to negate you in some way. Other vices have that feature, but in a more kind of accidental way. If I am greedy, say, and I want to get a lot of money, and you happen to be in my way, it may happen that now we uh, relate to each other in a kind of zero sum game kind of situation, where for me to get the money that I want, again, greed being my vice, I have to um, uh, negate you or deny you in some way, or take advantage of you unfairly or something. But that's purely accidental, right?
Mhm.
Uh, the situation could be one such that you would be a contributor to my getting money, or you being there would be indifferent. If you happen to be in my way in that particular scenario, and I let greed take the best of me and overrule concerns about justice and charity and all of that, um, right? I may actually want to uh, do something that is advantageous to me at your expense.
Mhm.
but that's accidental again, and it happens a lot, right? It's accidental and contingent, but it happens quite often because we bump against each other quite frequently in our interests and so on. But pride is that in an essential way. There is no situation in which pride does not involve um, exalting yourself at someone else's expense, because pride is um, a relational kind of thing. It's like being tall. I can only be tall relative to other people that are shorter than me, right? Um, uh, it's a relative term in that sense. Not a relative term, but a relative vice. English is my second language, as you know, Bill, and sometimes I have to go in circuitous routes, looking for the right words. But what I'm saying is that, in pride, you have essentially this kind of comparison where I am better off only if you're worse off. There is no scenario in which I am better off and you are also better off, right? Because um, so that it has that kind of structure. Um, So that was very illuminating and very helpful to me. That was a long and convoluted answer, but there it is.
Well, I thought about pride too, because pride, I mean, to me, there's like a right use of pride and a wrong use of pride. So, like a right pride, a right relationship to pride would be like, to me, like an Olympic athlete,
Mhm.
which is striving for this sort of excellence in an endeavor. And so it does come at the expense of others, because only one person can win the gold medal. But at the same time, there's, to me, that's, can be, it could also be a wrong use of pride, but it can be a right use of pride to strive for excellence in this sort of competitive way, I think. But I did enjoy also his discussion
Mm.
of pride. Um,
Can I explore that a little bit?
sure.
Because you introduced that, and it made me think of certain scenarios of the right use of pride and the wrong use of pride. I wonder if I at least would call what you described as pride, because I think an athlete worth his salt would actually look. What is it, pursue excellence for its own sake, right? So long as the person beat his own record or something, that of course everyone wants to get the gold medal, but I don't think any athlete would be satisfied if he got the gold medal by, say, poisoning the other person the day before
Right.
in their hotel or something, right?
Well,
But a
some would.
prideful, some
Some.
would, yeah, maybe the proud one, but a person who is not looking is not pursuing excellence for its own sake, which is something somewhat objective that you can measure yourself against, independent of what other people are doing or up to. You can have your own kind of competition with yourself, which just means you want to grow and improve. Um, it would not be satisfied if you made everyone else around you mediocre, so
Mhm.
that you happen to be, by comparison, better. It's only a proud person in that sense that would do that. So yeah, there's a little bit semantics. We can use the word pride in different ways, but I think I would like to reserve the word pride, at least in this sense of a vice, uh, to mean that kind of thing, the kind of person that would be satisfied by lowering everyone else, so he's the best, even with no personal improvement. You see, the athlete seems to be up to something else, something more noble. It seems to me. But anyway, I totally cut you off. So
No, what do you think about pride like a parent? Like, you're proud because your child did well in a test, or your child did some activity well, and so you're
mm,
proud, and it's really irrelevant if they won or not.
mhm, mhm,
You're just proud because they played the game, right?
mhm,
Um, and that kind of pride to me would be an example of maybe a right use of pride, because I
mhm,
feel like that's a natural thing. It's a natural feeling, and I don't really feel like that would detract from the divine at all.
mhm.
Which I
I agree.
understood that to be C.S. Lewis's, like, beef with pride, is that it leads to all other sins. He said, I think he makes some kind of sweeping statement like pride is the ultimate root of, which is why he considers it kind of the ultimate sin, because it leads to all the others. And he gives several examples, and I'm blanking on what they are in the book,
I am too.
of what they might, like, what pride would lead to. Like you mentioned greed, but that's an example. I believe, he had pride of like chastity, like sexual things and those kinds of where it would lead you off into an avenue that would take you away from the divine. But I feel like there is some pride that can actually even connect you more with the divine, which would be like the pride of a parent.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with you. That kind of pride, if we are to call it pride at all, if it's not a kind of a misnomer, it's not only is it not only is it not getting in the way of the divine or kind of godly way of being, but actually promotes it, right? Because what you're doing is you're exalting someone else, you're building someone else up. It's a form of charity, I suppose. Um, yeah, so we're in agreement there.
Yeah.
I think it's more of a semantic thing. Do we call it pride or do we call it something else?
Is
Do we
that
reserve the word pride for the vice? Or yeah,
yeah. Although, people will say children need their parents to feel proud of them. People
exactly.
need their parents to express that, like, I'm
Yeah,
very proud of you for what you did, or, and maybe that in that sense, it is an expression of love,
yeah,
but it's expressed in words of pride, I think.
yeah. Indeed, it is.
So one thing I liked about the book, right as it kicks off in the preface, he gives this analogy to spiritual seeking that I really liked. And it was about a spiritual seekers like roaming through a house filled with lots of rooms. And you have to roam through the house until you find the room that you find your home in, or you find comfort in, or that you feel is like your room. And that when you do find that room, then you should be careful not to criticize those who are still roaming the house, or those who chose other rooms, or those who are not even in rooms, they're just still in the hallway. And I thought that was a very sort of inclusive spiritual seeking, a message for spiritual seekers. Kind of a criticism, I guess, not to get into that too much yet, but I feel like he doesn't particularly follow through with that idea through the course of the book. But nevertheless, I thought that was a beautiful analogy of spiritual seeking. So I like that.
Yeah, although there is a veiled, not a veiled, there is an explicit, if I remember correctly, criticism of those who make the hall itself their home,
Their home, yeah.
right? Which is precisely my tendency. So that made me worry. Not that I was offended by it, but and maybe that's a danger for sure. But I tend to enjoy the process of seeking, and maybe there is a problem there of indefinitely deferring any kind of choice about where you're going to land. And that's my temperament with respect to spiritual matters, as it is with most matters. Um, but yeah, that's the one thing that Lewis says. Just make sure that you're not a roamer for eternity, and you think that that's an identity.
Yeah,
Um,
I get you. I get what you're saying there, because I feel like I'm also a person. I want to be in the room where the door doesn't shut too tight, and I can go like wander around in the other rooms and then come back to my room because I got
yeah.
my framework. I got my stuff, but I don't want to be in the room that they close the door and lock it. Yeah, I want to be in the one where
Mm,
you can go in and out, and you can go back to the hall for a while, and you can go into the room across the hall if you want to and check that out, and
mhm.
have dinner with those guys over across the hall, and
Yes.
I like that kind of spiritual seeking. But I did like
Yeah. That. Sorry, I cut you off, and I didn't
oh,
hear what
I
you said.
said I did like that analogy in generally speaking.
I like to. Yeah, I like it too. The call for tolerance and not being judgmental of others and so on.
Yeah, yeah. And then he also we didn't talk about I don't think we talked about this when we talked about this book before, but I thought about it when I was rethinking the book, and that is early in the book he talks about the law of human nature. And I really liked thinking about that, where there's this we think of laws of nature, but we don't usually think of like laws of human nature, which were and he gives examples, and I don't remember the specific ones, but it's basically behaviors. Like there's a law of human nature that we don't kill each other for we don't just get pissed off and kill someone. or we don't, there's a law of human nature that selfish people aren't valued in their community. When they become known as being selfish, then they, so that's kind of a law of human nature, or a law of, I think he might use selfish as the example. Or greedy people, like across cultures and across time, these sorts of behaviors are considered, according to him, and the law of human nature, against the law of, human nature. Like everyone instinctively, you don't have to be taught that. You just instinctively know that you don't like that kind of behavior in others, anyway. Um, and then he talks about how the thing with humans, though, is we can choose to, whereas you have to obey the laws of nature. So, like the apple has to fall from the tree, and two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom makes a water molecule. Like those kind of laws, like they're just fixed. But the laws of human nature are not fixed. So we understand that, like, selfishness is a law of human nature, to not be selfish, but we can just choose to ignore that if we want to.
Mhm.
Whereas we can't choose laws of nature. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. He's talking about a distinction that philosophers like to. I don't know why I did that. Philosophers. That was Freudian slip of the hand, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh, Philosophers uh, make this distinction between descriptive laws, right, that are laws that describe the way things go, and normative laws, which are laws that one ought to obey but may not. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
I didn't know that
So
philosophical term. That's cool.
yeah, descriptive laws and normative laws. So the laws of nature are descriptive laws, and what he calls the laws of human nature or the moral law is a normative law that gives you standards for how you ought to behave, though it doesn't mean necessarily that you will behave that way. Um, yeah, but it's interesting that he goes from the mere existence. Maybe this is something we can talk about. He goes from the mere existence of the moral law of morality, to concluding that there must be some kind of mind guiding. He
Mhm.
offers a kind of argument, loose argument, for how we can go from the mere fact that the moral law exists, that there is this law of how we ought to behave that we at the same time all recognize and all fail to live up to, how that fact or set of facts uh, leads to this conclusion that there must be some kind of mind behind nature.
Mhm.
Uh, that's something that I wonder about that argument. I don't necessarily disagree with the conclusion of the argument, namely that there is a mind guiding things. I think I'm a theist. If, uh, Again, I'm a roamer mostly, but insofar as I have a home in theism, more or less. Although the door is kind of open and loose, I go in and out. So I'm amenable to the conclusion. I just wonder about the argument itself, or at least the thought itself, that because we recognize the objectivity of morality, then there must be a mind uh, behind all things and behind that objectivity. But sorry, I just raised a problem. I don't have a solution, and I actually don't have much to say about it. Um, but it's not clear to me anyway, the connection. I would have to hear a little more to see how we can go from the moral law exists, therefore God, at least understood as a mind of some kind, whether it's personal or not, or whether it's the God of Christianity, because there he says, I'm not arguing here for the God of Christianity yet, but minimally for theism, it seems, if not something more general. But the connection is a little mysterious to me, how it goes from one to the other. I just wanted to flag that. I'm not sure the extent to which it's helpful to flag such things without having much to say about them. But um, yeah, I just bring this up because I know that there are alternatives, it seems to me. So, for example, Plato thought that there were objective moral rules and values that
Mhm.
were objective, but he grounds the objectivity of values and of moral rules and so on in something else, not necessarily in a personal God.
Hmm.
So why can there not be eternal things that are immaterial, but those things are not do not constitute some kind of personality that it can engage with in a kind of personal way through prayer and that kind of thing. Uh, so Lewis seems to require, to me, a few more steps to get there. Again, I'm not rejecting the conclusion. I'm just wondering whether the argument for that conclusion is a good one.
Yeah, I mean, and that's
Sorry, I
interesting.
went on a crazy
No,
philosophical
no,
rant.
that's interesting. It actually leads to my next sort of leads in because that's actually one of the points I didn't like. Well, that argument I didn't dislike. So, but later in the book, as he starts to talk about these moral concepts, um, well, we'll get into that in a little bit. Let's talk next though about the map analogy because I feel like that's kind of falls on the heels of that argument, which was
Okay.
that um, his map analogy was something to the effect of we must go into this discussion thinking of these terms, which I took to mean like these moral concepts and these sort of concepts, as a map. And whereas a map is not a exact representation of reality, it is a guides us towards that. So he says, you you won't see reality in the map, so you won't see like the ocean. You will just see this representation of the ocean, but it will lead you, to if you're trying to get to Newfoundland, for example, and that if you don't have this map, meaning these guideposts, you won't make it to. He uses, I think, Newfoundland as the example. You'll make it across the ocean, and so that map analogy, I really liked. I really liked that idea because he seemed to be saying we're pointing to these concepts, but they're not absolutes. They're only symbols and they're guideposts, but they're not the real true thing. Did you understand it that way?
Yeah, I understood it precisely that way. I think it's great. I think that's just a warning against two attitudes that would be, I think, in his view, extreme and bad. Both attitudes. So the extremes would be one to fall in love with theological discussion and theological
Mhm.
concepts or dogmas, for example, and think that that's God, that's the truth. The living truth is just a crystallized formulae, whatever. And that would be like taking the map to be the ocean. And you want to take a swim and try to dive into the map, and
Yeah.
it's going to be disastrous. That would be one extreme because it's easy. The human intellect tends to fall in love with itself, and so, at least for someone with my temperament, I love discussions and that sort of thing. And it's easy to get lost and value um, theological matters or philosophical matters as ends in themselves, or especially for theology, right? Someone who's trying to have the proper relationship to God can get caught up into a sectional kind of controversies and that kind of thing, and before you know it, your God becomes the dogma of your sect, let's say.
Mhm.
Uh, but that's the map he's saying, right? And behind the map there's the reality of the ocean and of islands and so on, which is infinitely more complex, infinitely richer. But the other extreme is this: well, then why don't we just do away with maps, with theology and conceptual stuff, throw all that away and just jump into the ocean? Because then you're going to be in the concrete reality in the ocean. That is, you're going to be relating to God you're going to make contact with God, but you're going to be lost in a certain way. So these are the two extremes, right? Maps are for something to help guide you, but don't mistake the map for the reality. And the reality is there for you to relate to it directly. But just because of that fact, don't throw away all your conceptual apparatus that will help you situate yourself in relation to that reality. So I guess there is a place for the ocean, and there is a place for a map, but don't try to dive into the map, and don't try to use the ocean to guide you itself, guide you directly, as if
Yeah.
it were a map, right? It doesn't have a built-in GPS. I suppose.
Well, that sort of leads me. That's actually really well put, and it actually leads me to. I guess now would be a good time to bring up. I guess my primary one of my primary my main, I guess probably not a main primary um, criticism of the book, or criticism of his, not really the book, but his approach that he took here, and that is I feel like he started taking the map for reality throughout the whole rest of
Mm,
the book.
interesting.
So things like chastity and these sort of ideas that we have of um, pride and forgiveness and chastity, and which other ones does he talk about? Love, and um, that he then goes on to be very rigid. I felt in my interpretation of it, I felt he was very rigid and very concrete in it. So he was like, "Well, chastity is we have to be chaste, and that's it, or else you won't have eternal life. Period. And just let's move on to the next thing." And so it was like not what's the right way to be to have a sexual life, or what's the right way to approach sex, which is what he's
Mhm,
basically talking about with chastity. But just you have to be, he doesn't give any sort of like context to it other
mhm,
than you can be married and have sex and that's great because you have kids, but then that's it. um he doesn't
mhm.
really allow for any other interpretation
Yeah.
of human sexuality, which is this huge thing
Mhm,
that is way more than just getting married and having kids.
mhm,
It impacts everybody's life pretty much, not everybody but pretty much.
mhm.
And he's just, to me he's like interpreting that as the map, not the guideposts. So
Yeah, I see what you mean. He seems to be the tone and the kind of exclusionary language, not in the political sense of inclusion and exclusion that we use nowadays in the political realm. Also that, but the more like this is the way, the others are not. It's a very cutting kind of language and very kind of box you in, especially for someone who's not offering a lot of arguments for what he's saying. It seems a little, at least in this book, he seems to be a little kind of too certain in a way with it. To go back to the previous analogy, he seems to choose a room and lock the door shut
definitely.
with many bolts. Let's put it that way. And for someone with for people with our more exploratory, I suppose, temperament, that will tend to rub us the wrong way, I suppose. Yeah, I saw that too. I know what you mean. Yeah. So you think that he's attaching himself too tightly to the dogmas, or to his dogmas anyway. Yeah, I can totally see that. I don't disagree.
Yeah, because he
It,
says it's, I think the section called like how Christian behavior,
mhm,
and his Christian behavior, like to me that was very, like it didn't have a lot to say about how to live a good life, or how to live better or live happier or a more meaningful life, which to me that would be the central message of Christianity, really. He puts it all sort of on the, this is what you have to do to get this eternal, this reward, ultimate
mhm,
reward, which was, I don't think he says heaven. I think he calls it eternal life.
mhm.
Um, anyway, um,
Yeah, he. What do I want to say about that? Let's see. I think it does offer um, a path for living a meaningful life, but it's a little bit. It would have to be fleshed out a little more. It's a little bit formulaic. It's essentially submit yourself to the will of God. Uh, but then, what is that will? The content of that will? How exactly? That's where we get into the problems, because there's a sense in which, for I suppose, a Christian, even a theist, I think that would be almost like a true by definition statement, right? The most proper life is one in which you do God's will. but what is that, right? And he
Hmm.
gives a very specific, um, not a definition of what that means, a very narrow, but not very articulated, paradoxically enough, view of what that means. He basically followed the rules of the basic kind of crystallized rules that have arisen within certain Christian traditions, right? So follow those. He doesn't quite explain why those are the ones to be followed as opposed to others, why they cannot be modified in this or that way. Doesn't really have, at least in that book, a sophisticated articulation for why those specific rules are to be followed. So yes, I suppose one, again, a Christian or even a theist would agree that one ought to follow God's will. That's to be happier, to live a flourishing life. But he goes, and what that means is this: there are these 15 rules, follow them,
Hmm.
or at the very least, don't violate them, and um, and that's it. And I at least would like to hear a little bit more about why those, why not more than those, or fewer than those, why not modifications of those, and for that he would have to have a more articulated theology, I suppose, or philosophical reflection. Although he says he's not a theologian or anything of the sort, he's just presenting what he takes to be the bare minimum. But what we're learning again, I guess, in this discussion is that what he takes to be the bare minimum for you to be a mere Christian would leave some of us out, I suppose,
Yeah.
out of the hall, even.
Yeah. Yeah. On the front step. Yeah, he says so. Yeah, it's a list of kind of do's and don'ts, and
Yeah.
one of the kind of the most heinous chapters was the marriage one. I thought because that's the one where he says, "Well, I hate to say it, but wives, you got to submit to your husbands. There's this hierarchy, and
Yeah.
that's just the way it is. So, too bad for you.
Yeah.
Hope you get a good husband." So, that's kind of like to me that was like that really shook my confidence in what he had to say about that subject because I thought,
Yeah.
he's really just sort of taking this marriage covenant that is traditional
Yeah.
and saying you have to this is one of the do's. So, this is what you have to do and
Right.
in order to fulfill the rules
Mhm.
and have eternal life or whatever. And so
Mhm.
I didn't like that, but
Yeah, I have a couple of things to say about that. One is that doesn't seem to me, again, I'm not a Christian. I'm not opposed to Christianity. As you know, I'm a Christian sympathizer as of now. God knows where it's going to go, but um, it seems to me that to the extent that you would have to have a leader at all in a marriage, it would have to be the wisest person, and that will, of course, vary, I suppose, depending on the reality that confronts you, right? So, with respect to this one thing, my partner is the wisest, and with respect to this other thing, I'm the wisest. So we're gonna, or it could even be the case that one person is wisest in all things. Who knows? I mean, but the notion that it has to be tied to sex, biological sex, seems a little. It doesn't seem wise to me. But I also want to say something for Lewis, at least for his perspective, where he's coming from, because I think what he would tell us if he were to hear this conversation, he would be like, "Hey guys, I'm not the one to make the rules." I
mhm,
think that's what he would say.
mhm,
Christianity is not there to. I'm not there to shape it. It's there to shape me. You guys just want to cherry pick and project your own kind of 21st century values onto Christianity and bend it to fit your will, whereas I want to have my will bend to God's will, and He was the one who said these things, not me. So take it up to the big guy, and um, at least that's his perspective, and it may not be my perspective, but there's something to be said about it, because if the danger on that side, on the side from which he's operating, it seems, is that he's gonna get enamored of the map itself and hold on to dogmas a little too tightly, forget about and maybe lose sight of the spirit, maybe that animates those dogmas. The danger on that side is that, for sure. There is also a danger in this game that we're playing, in this conversation where we get to decide what is amenable to us, what is not. At least, I mean, maybe that's not the game that you, Bill, play in your religion, but that's the game that I tend to play. I not being a particularly religious person, of religious in the sense of having kind of a specific tradition that I belong to. Um, with the danger on this side to be too free floating and to be a free thinker is that you may end up just instead of being shaped by the religion or by the tradition, you may just make the tradition or the religion serve whatever you already happen to be or what you want to be. Um, at least that's the danger. Doesn't mean that it's going to happen, of course. Just like it doesn't mean necessarily that someone who's more traditional has to become so enamored of the dogmas that they will lose sight of the spirit that animates the crystallized dogmas. I don't know if I'm making much sense. I'm just saying that there is something to be said for Lewis and his perspective. It's not mine, but we have to be at least attuned to the criticism that I think he would voice, which is you guys be careful not to end up operating such that you are just making up the rules that you prefer and you like to fit your desires, your predilections, your sensibilities, and so on, and just making use of Christianity for that. I think that would be his criticism of us, just like we have criticisms of him.
Yeah, I think
Anyway,
that would be his criticism, and I think how I would answer him as a friend, as a Quaker, I feel like I would say, okay, I understood, and I agree that we can't just decide things for how we want them to be or how we wish they were, but we actually have to kind of discern. But I think my comment back to him would be, what in the scripture makes you believe that the map was created a couple of thousand years ago, and then that's it? That if Christianity is dynamic and the Holy Spirit and Jesus, the Spirit of Jesus, is walking among us today, shouldn't we be listening to it? Like, what does it tell us? Like, what are they? What is where does it lead us, and what does it lead us to do? Does it want us to have slavery? We decided a couple like 150 years ago here in the U.S., kind of late to the game, but nevertheless, finally, that slavery was not in the divine plan, whereas many religions believed it was. Even as it was getting abolished here, there were Christian people saying this is part of the divine plan. It's always been this way, and this is the way it needs to be. But the morality evolved, where now it's kind of unthinkable to think of owning and buying and selling people, at least here in the U.S. I mean, generally speaking, not that that doesn't go on still, obviously, but um, morality of women's rights and how children are treated, child labor, and all this has evolved. So that's how I would answer Lewis, would be to say, we need to, Christianity is dynamic. It didn't stop. We didn't get a rule book that ended and then we're just going to follow that same rule book forever. We should be listening to the Spirit today and living our lives accordingly. And that would include things like reevaluating what right marriage would be, what a marriage that's, because a marriage, even a Christian, happy Christian marriage would have been different 150 years ago. That wouldn't be to the same way today. We
mm-hmm,
wouldn't think of it as right,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
even though in the past we would have thought of it as right. The man and the woman and the children would have all thought, oh, we have a wonderful family. We're all happy, and this is the right way to be. And it would have been the right way to be at that time. Um, so anyway, I guess I just have this view more of a dynamic Christianity that is changeable and that is um, it is being continuously revealed, But there is a danger there because that means anybody could come along and say, this was revealed to me. And, you have to discern that that's really the truth, or really the path that you feel is right. But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And, you are preaching to the choir, as they say, because I have the same kind of temperament. I see the truth as something dynamic that keeps being opened up. Um, it can never be properly crystallized once and for all.
Mhm.
I just want to flag something because I don't think that's your view. Some of the things you said could give one the impression. I don't think, if it is your view, just let me know. But it could give the impression that you are being a relativist with respect to morality, where morality was evil then, now it's not evil anymore. Uh, and morality evolves in the sense that it um, changes. Sure, the customs change, and what people think is right and wrong changes and evolves. And we're constantly discovering things about the nature of what is right and wrong, uh, and expanding our notions and so on, and deepening our insights. But I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think you mean to imply that right and wrong itself, there's no objectivity there, that it's all relative, it changes from place to place and culture to culture. Or maybe that's your view. I don't know. I'm
No,
just curious.
I feel like there is an objective
Yeah,
morality, that
right.
there is sort of like that law of human nature that we talked about at the beginning of the show,
Okay, okay.
where there is this sort of, so women being equal to men was always the case,
I
I
see.
guess, because they're humans just like us. So, um, but the structure of something like a social structure, like a marriage, that was structured one way would not, like, to put a 1850s marriage in today's world, we would not consider that a right marriage. We would not consider that the right way to be married. I mean, most of us wouldn't, especially if you were a woman. Where she can't own property and she can't inherit stuff, and all that. But at the time, it there was no concept other than that. So, like, it wasn't like someone thought, oh, you know what? In the future, there's going to be this concept of marriage that's like women have, they're CEOs of companies and they're voting and they can own property and all that. They can have kids without being married, and would have been completely something they wouldn't even be able to, like, mentally process that.
Mm-hmm.
So they wouldn't. So they can't be expected to have our notion of a marriage in 1850.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a relativist in that sense, but
Mm.
I do think that
I
there
understand.
is objective morality. There is objective
I
sort of
understand.
truths. Does that
I
make sense?
understand what you mean. Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense. So let me see if I got this right. There is a moral law that is objective, um, but the mores change, the customs, or what we think is right and wrong changes. It's our thought, our culture that changes, not the law. The law is eternal in some way, and we just discover more and more. Sometimes we get it wrong, sometimes we get it right. What we thought was right, we now realize is wrong. But it's not that there's no right and wrong. It's just we realize it only now when we didn't realize it then. And that's
Yeah.
okay. Another danger that occurred to me, I too share your kind of dynamic view of the truth. I'm just going to put it in more, what is it? Um, I guess what you would call the spirit, if I'm not mistaken. I tend to identify as truth or reason, maybe. Not reason in a narrow sense, kind of a computer that only, rational in that kind of, but a fully integrated reason that is integrated with the rest of one's soul. Um, I also have a dynamic view of such things, and I'm also suspicious of overly crystallized, ossified structures But to go back to different dangers in different places, the dangers of ossification and crystallization and dogmas that are perfectly fixed and subscribed to once and for all, the dangers there are clear. The dangers for someone who's a little more open in temperament and in approach is to fall into a kind of relativism. We dealt with that already. That's not the case here. Um, Another danger is also to always think in hindsight that wherever we happen to be is progress in relation to what was. So you mentioned a bunch of things.
Yeah.
I happen to think that all the things you mentioned were in fact signs of progress, right? But there's always the danger of thinking, because our moral insights are constantly evolving and our moral knowledge is expanding, whatever values I happen to adopt that may just may just be the prejudices of a 21st century guy living in the US or something, right? These are the right ones, or better than, because you can have elements of the past that are better and more noble and more morally advanced than what we have now, and we decay in certain respects, we improve in others, and
So true. So true.
just another danger, I guess. Anyway, I don't know why I got into
No, that's very true. So that's like, to me, that's like one of the great tragedies of history, is like, because we can go backwards. And so, like, one period of history that I love reading about is like around 400 to 400 to like 600. This period of time where Christianity was in ascent and the pagan world was in decline. Not, I wouldn't even say decline. It was in actual decline is the wrong word, because that implies a natural sort of decline, and it was actually on purpose that it was being like eradicated. And so there was this notion that they had this idea that this is the better way, and so therefore we have to destroy this older way. But a lot got destroyed in that older way that would have been really beneficial to people, such as how to build a decent road, how to read.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff.
The wonderful bureaucracy of the Roman.
Yeah, the bureaucracy, like how to organize a state properly. All this was lost because they thought, well, we got the right thing now. We don't need this, and so we're on a march to progress. Or another case would be the Soviet revolution, where they're just going to wipe out this old way and build this new way. And it's very dangerous, I think, to think that we are always on a march of progress. I think it's very Western European to think that. So it is my default to think this way. I've recognized that a long time ago, and this sort of optimism that is inherent in a lot of, at least American culture, where I always just think things are going to work out for the best. This has not always served me well. It's going to be fine. Everything's going to work out fine.
Yeah, just the fact that time itself is progressing means that we're progressing towards what is better. That's a problem.
Some better future, and that's not.
Yeah.
History proves very much otherwise. Yeah. That there can be periods of time when people really marching into the future, thinking that they're progressing everything forward, and in actuality, they're pulling everything back. All right. So before we run out of time, there's a couple of more things I wanted to bring up, and another one is, in the book there's a little small section that he mentions offhand that I just have thought about ever since, and that is, when a bad person, let's see, I wrote it down. I didn't write down the actual quote, I just wrote down the concept. Okay. When a person is acting worse and worse, he understands his badness less and less. And when a person is acting better and better, he understands his badness more. So the more you... and I love that. So people that are acting worse and worse lose sight of the fact that they're actually becoming worse and worse. They don't understand that, oh, I'm just getting worse. But then the other way is true as well. Like, do you think, oh, the better you become, the more you think, oh gosh, I'm a terrible person.
It's so true.
I thought that
It's
was
so true. Yeah, it's true. Like in moral matters, the better you become morally, the more aware you become of being sinful,
hmm
not living up to the moral law. It's true in so many respects. That's why people who are excellent at things tend to be humble about those things.
yeah.
It's not. I don't think it's false modesty. It wasn't right. The wisest man in Athens, Socrates, thought he was not wise at all, and I don't think he was being falsely modest.
Yeah.
Precisely because he was very wise, he was aware of his lack of wisdom, right? Famously. And that's the same thing that when you see an amazing musician or a genius at something, they go like, "Oh no, I suck. There's so much I have to still learn, and oh, I struggle with this." And yeah, maybe arrogance requires ignorance or kind of self
Something like that.
blindness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Pride. Back to pride.
back to pride.
One other thing I wanted to talk about that I really did not like about the book before we run out of time is I did not like the chat. We already talked about the marriage chapter. Following on the heels of the marriage chapter, we had the dreaded chapter on forgiveness, which sounds like it's going to be this wonderful thing about how you forgive people, right, for doing you wrong. Oh no, no. He says in that chapter that a Christian warrior is fully justified in killing his enemies.
Mhm.
He was just like, "Well, I'm sorry, people, but this is just how it is. A Christian warrior is fully justified in killing his enemies." After he had made the point through the book of Christian love and of Jesus' sacrifice and Jesus' example of nonviolence and of being, I think he talked about like going to the being beaten and all that, and not going to the cross willingly.
Mhm.
Um, and then he says that. And it was another example of, I think, that's not even the map because
Mhm.
that's not even in forgiveness in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Like
Mhm.
that, and I'm not just trying to like advocate for pacifism because I realize pacifism peace is one of those things, and pacifism is one of those things that's you have to discern. Like you can't just say, well, or you can, I guess people do say, well, I'm never going to, no matter what you're doing, I'm not going to hit you or anything.
Mhm.
And there have been people in history that have done that, but others discern that differently, and
Mhm.
that's okay. But how he managed to, why he decided to put this concept in this chapter on forgiveness leaves me mystified because
Mhm.
he's basically saying forgiveness is almost like to be Christ-like, you have to forgive because that was ultimately what Jesus, like his last words are like, basically, I forgive all of you.
Mhm.
Um, so he's basically holding that up, I thought, to be this high Christian ideal. Only like, unless you're a Christian warrior, and then feel free to kill your enemies at will. And I realize also he's writing this right after World War II, and that's a cultural trauma.
Mhm. Mhm.
But it didn't fit to me. It didn't fit.
That's probably the best and only explanation. We can only offer, I think, a biographical, psychological explanation of why he's holding that view because it doesn't seem to fit with the things he said before. He says he's not a pacifist. I guess that's fine.
Yeah.
Um, but it would seem, I mean, his complaint was, if I remember correctly, is like, what is this thing about fighting wars with a long face, as if it were a tragedy, right? You should be a happy warrior and kill with alacrity or something. Not. I'm paraphrasing it, maybe making a little bit of a caricature, but that's the attitude generally, right? And yeah, I think a Christian, I think, would have to say that you would have to fight with a long face, that
hmm
it is a tragedy that you have to kill if you decide to go that route, as again using discernment as opposed to go pacifist in that occasion. Let's say that you think you are justified in self-defense or whatever it is, right? it can never be a cause for celebration within a Christian framework. It seems to me. So yeah, maybe I'm not seeing something here. Maybe there's some. Although he says something, I'm sure that if an English soldier kills a German soldier, or they kill each other, right, then if they are both good Christians, they will laugh about it in heaven or something. I don't know if we can bring in the metaphysics to justify this, but
I forgot about that part.
yeah. But yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I could be totally mistaken about this. I think Augustine at somewhere at one point. I'm terrible with remembering things. Um, may have been Aquinas, but now I don't know. I think it was Augustine. Said something that a Christian, when being attacked, maybe that's a radical view, I don't know, but it's his view. It doesn't mean that it's the orthodox view of Christianity. I mean, Christianity is so multifaceted, as we already covered. But his view, I think, is that if you are a Christian and you wanted to live up to the standards of Christ and the saints and whatever, yeah, you would have to forego your life if someone wants to rob you of it. But society allows for self-defense as a right. It is not a Christian right; it's a kind of secular right because it's something necessary to stabilize society. So it's the lesser of two evils between you being killed when you're innocent by someone being killed unjustly and killing the other person in self-defense. Killing the other person in self-defense is the least of the two evils, but it is an evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to go beyond what society allows for in order to stabilize itself with its system of justice, whatever, if you want to live up to the spirit of Christianity, then you would have to forego your life, it seems. That would be kind of, yeah. And here he seems to be saying that he seems to be treating killing, at least in war, as if it were not an evil at all, unless we're woefully mischaracterizing his view. I don't think we are, but we could be. I don't know. People will let us know, I'm sure, if we got this wrong. But yeah, he seems to be saying that it should not be treated as an evil, killing in war. Or if it is, somehow he has to square the circle of okay, it is an evil, but you should be happy about it as you do it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I
people will inform us, I'm sure,
well, I
about
mean,
what we got wrong.
I think that's what it. To me, that's what it was saying. That's what I would have to go back and read it again, but it really, I really, I thought, oh my gosh, it was very explicit. I thought, like um, not vague what he was trying to say there at all. I didn't think.
Yeah, again, the best explanation is post-war England in the wake
Mhm.
of that traumatic event, and we, for the sake of charity, might as well give a psychological, historical, biographical explanation of that view, and
Yeah.
write it off as a blip of irrationality. I guess um, it seems to me.
Okay, well, we are almost at an hour, I think. But one final thought I had to maybe end the chat on is the quote at the very end of the book about the beauty and divinity, which I thought was cool, of diversity, and how he talks about this throughout the book, or not throughout the book, but off and on in the book. He brings it up several different times in several different ways about becoming an integrated self and your whole self, bringing your sort of your whole self to your faith, to Christianity in this case. And at the end of the book, he talks also in the book about how evil is not creative; it can't create; it's anti-creative, and how it is the divine that's what's creative. So to create yourself is to participate in the divine. And at the very end of the book, he talks about, he says, I didn't write down the exact quote, but the kind of the gist of it was how monstrously alike are tyrants, but how beautifully diverse are the saints. Something like that. Like all tyrants are evil in the same way, but all saints, the saints are holy or divine in different ways, in diverse
Mhm.
ways that are really
Mhm.
unique to them. And I loved that. I thought that was a beautiful sort of way to end the book.
Yeah, it's great. And something just occurred to me. I might as well say it may be helpful to other people. It was helpful to me when reading this. So the worry that he's addressing there is that Christianity would be a homogenizing force, making a bunch of little clones, right? People who all look and feel the same.
Hmm.
And he's saying not at all. He gives the analogy of the salt, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah,
So
yeah,
very, very biblical thing, right?
yeah,
The
yeah,
salt. So salt has the same taste if you just taste it by itself, but if you apply it to different kinds of food, it brings out the different flavors of
yeah.
those
Hmm.
food items, right? More flavor than they would have in themselves, or something. It brings out the diversity of flavors, in fact.
Right.
So salt doesn't make everything taste like salt. And he says Christianity is like that. So again, he's tackling his worry that Christianity would be a homogenizing force that would rob people of their personality, creativity, and so on. Now, to go back to the opening of this conversation, we talked about his analogy of the hall being Christianity. For me, the hall is just being a lover of truth. It's a little broader. The hall. Uh, uh, but anyway, you have the hall of Christianity with different rooms. These are the different traditions, denominations, and so on. The I noticed something now, just as I was talking to you. I said that I have a tendency to be a roamer. I don't even know if that's a word. Is it roaming to be a roamer? If not, I guess I just mean
I think so. Yeah.
someone who roams.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's the case because, and I think you share a similar temperament that when you, well, I'm not going to speak for you. I'm going to speak for me only. Whenever I look at a particular religious, spiritual, or even philosophical tradition, and I start to uh, get ready to maybe commit to it, not necessarily commit, but sometimes, as he says, it's not a good idea to just be a seeker forever. You, at one point, I suppose you have to make choices, right? But whenever that's the case, at least within spirituality for me, which is more alive within the Christian tradition, just because of my background. I'm a Westerner. Is that the word? Um, among other things, but I feel uh, something stifling about it. It's very strange. I feel like when I'm about to commit to something, to a tradition, to a set of practices or dogmas or rituals, even if it's a non-ritual version, non-ritualized version of
Hmm.
Christianity or any other. Again, it can even apply to philosophical views. I always feel my spirit maybe being a little homogenized, stifled a little bit, and as if I would not have room to be creative and so on. But I think now I will take that as a sign that I'm doing it wrong. Whatever it is I'm doing it wrong. And
Really?
whatever, yeah, that I think so. Whatever it is. So if let me put it in this kind of theistic language, maybe even Christian language, right? If I'm relating to God in such a way that I feel stifled, I'm not relating to God properly. And whatever it is I'm doing in relation to the thing, I'm not doing it properly. Or at least the thing is a false thing. That could be that.
Okay.
It could be. There's always the option that the tradition itself is problematic or something, but I think it's a little more likely for me to think that I don't know. I got any tradition that has been around for a long time. There's a lot of wisdom in those religious traditions, right? Um, that have been around for a long time. And if you want to look at it and you again, if you're feeling a little stifled, if you feel negated by it, maybe you're not relating to it properly. Just a thought.
That's yeah, I that could be. That could be. Or another option would be that you're in the room of the free spirits that that you're in the room, that your door is not only not locked, but it's like standing wide open, and you just kind of you go out in the hall again and to chat,
Yeah,
have a cup of coffee with somebody.
yeah,
You walk down the hall to the philosophy room, the Plato room, and you hang out there for a while, and then you go back to your free spirit room, and then and there's nothing wrong with that either, right? I don't
Not
think
according to me. According to Lewis, there is. So that's the question. That's what I have
I'd
to
be
think about.
perfectly fine for you to be in the free spirit room. I'll come hang out with you guys sometime.
Okay,
All
sounds good.
right. Well, thanks for the conversation. Of course, I enjoyed it. It's tons of fun. We have actually read a book together called We. So we may do another chat soon on that as well, if you are up for that.
I certainly am. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure talking to you. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
And
it's
let's do it again for sure.